So hi, everyone. We are now back with the second part of our GitHub course. We've been exploring GitHub Online so far, and I've showed you how you can create repos, how you can make your first commits. We have made our first pull requests. But up to now, we've just been working on GitHub Online. I guess for most of you, it might be actually much more interesting to be able to version control files that are part of projects that you have already on your computer. So now I'll show you how you can use Git on your local machine, and also how you can upload files from your local machine onto GitHub, and vice versa. There are two ways between GitHub Online and your computer, and how you can move files between the two. The first is making a copy of an online repository down to your local machine. This process is called cloning, and I think I've already said that basically everything on your computer and also everything on GitHub Online is just a folder. So when you clone a repository, it will just appear as a folder on your local machine. And that's the top-down way. The bottom-up way is that you can also import a repository that you have already on your computer, so an existing repository, to GitHub Online. That's the bottom-up way. And the tool that we are going to use to establish this interaction between your local machine and GitHub Online is called GitHub Desktop. GitHub Desktop is the in-house GUI that is provided by Git. There's a couple of other ways and other tools that you could use, but GitHub Desktop is quite nice and easy way to get started. One of the other tools, of course, is the command line, but that requires a bit of knowledge of how to use the command line and the shell. So we are going to use GitHub Desktop. Ideally, you should already have that installed on your machine, but it doesn't really matter if not. And I'll show you in a second why. So we will start with cloning a repository from GitHub Online onto your local machine. And like I said, cloning just means making basically a copy of the folder on GitHub Online and its entire history, and then downloading it to your computer. And you do this by starting online. So you go to your repo. You can use the test repo that you've created, or also the Git course training repo. It might be that if you haven't forked the Git course training repo, you would have to do that. So fork it first so that it's under your account. But then once you've done that, you can go to code here. And then it shows you a couple of options how to download this repository. The first one, if you use the command line, you could copy this link here, and then use some commands. So, that's one way. You can download the folder as a zip folder. That's also always an option, but it already gives you here the option open with GitHub Desktop. And if you click that, and if you haven't installed GitHub Desktop, it asks you whether you want to install it now. So that's a pretty easy way to also install GitHub Desktop. If you click it, and if you have installed it, then it asks you whether you want to open GitHub Desktop. So you can just say yes. And then clone again. Yep, and there we have it. Now we have, it went pretty fast because it's a small repository, but now we have basically this GitHub, the Git course training repo on our local machine. And we see here how it is represented in this GUI. It shows us a couple of things here. So the first one is that we are in this folder that is now on our computer. I'll show you in a second where it is. Then we are on the branch main. And this button here allows you to update your local with your current repository. But at the moment, because we've just cloned it, there's nothing to see, basically. It will tell us that, there's no local changes. Yeah, and you see here, that our history is clear, our other changes is clear, no local changes, our local repository is up to date with the online repository. Now, for a second, let's explore where this folder is actually. So let's just look at it again online. You see this Git course training repo has a couple of MDs files because I've encouraged a couple of other participants to add their MD files. But it's very flat repository. So it's basically just a folder with these MD files. And then, so for me, all the GitHub folders go into a folder called GitHub. And there it is. I think if your computer is smart, it should create this GitHub folder once you download or clone your first repo. If it doesn't, it might also prompt you, to choose a location where these folders go. But you see, basically, it's just a folder, and these are the MDs files. So it's very similar like that. That's how they look on your computer, basically. Cool. So now let's go back to our GitHub desktop GUI. It also shows you a couple of more things here. So this GitHub desktop GUI is only for the interaction between GitHub Online and your local machine. You cannot, it's not a text editor, so you cannot change any files in this GUI. This is why it has here a prompt to open the repository in your external editor. You can change this under preferences. For me, it takes Visual Studio Code because that's my text editor. You might want to put Sublime text there, or just your in-house text editor. It doesn't really matter in this case because the changes are quite simple. Yeah. And then, view the files of your repository in Finder. So again, if you don't know where your files are on your local machine, you can click here and it should show you it's here. And then you can also go back and open the repository page again on GitHub, then it should go back to this repository that we've just cloned. Cool. So then let's maybe make some changes. So we've done that. Yeah, so let's now say we want to continue working on our project on our local machine. So we make some changes to our local repository. Like I said, the GitHub desktop GUI does not allow it, it's not a text editor, so you would have to open the repository in a text editor. So I just click here on Visual Studio Code. It will open Visual Studio Code, hopefully. Yeah. And if you're familiar with Visual Studio Code, you see here basically that's the folder, and then here all the files in there. And in whatever text editor you're using, it should be kind of similar. You should always see the folder somewhere and then the files. And if you click on a file, you have here the file. So now I've now opened one of my files, and let's just add some more text. I always tell people about my cat. So important for GitHub in general, GitHub desktop, in order to recognize the changes, you have to save them. So if they don't show up in GitHub desktop, then probably because you haven't hit save. But now here we see it. So basically, GitHub desktop checks this entire repository. And it tells me here, oh, I've deleted some typo that ended up in there, and I've added some lines. Similar to GitHub Online, in this tool, you now have to commit these changes. So you write a commit message. And then you commit to main, because yeah, you would have to change that first if you wanted to commit to another branch, but let's just now commit to main. Cool. That now means that Git is running well on our local machine, and we've just added another change to the file on our local machine. Be aware that this was the change that happened only on your local machine. And now your local machine and your GitHub Online are out of sync because the local machine is one change in the future, basically. And GitHub Desktop is quite smart and actually recognizes that. So it says basically you have one local commit waiting to be pushed to GitHub, and it already prompts you, do you want to update that? You don't have to, so you can make further changes. If you want to, then the number of changes here would just add up. But I would recommend, at some point it's then smart to just push, also because it's a nice feeling. So let's just say, okay, we're done with our changes for today. So let's just push them to GitHub. Cool, now it's gone, and let's see whether they're there. It should also see it here. Yes, so this is the latest change to the repository. You see my commit message, and it should also be now, I think it was in the Johanna 2.1. Yeah. You see here, I've deleted this typo, I've added a new sentence, and you can see the entire history again, what I've done here. Cool. Let's go out of this. Great. So we've done that. And similarly, we can also just continue working on GitHub Online. Let's do that as well. So let's say similarly to what we've done before, let's just make a change here in my, this is not, I need to update this. Yep. Let's just make a change here. So I commit the changes here just as we've done before. So we've done that here. And now we have it the other way around. So now we have made changes to GitHub Online that are not yet on our local machine. So in order to get them on our local machine, we have to update the local repository with the remote repository. So we click this fetch origin button. It tells us, oh, there's been a change. Do you want to pull that down? And you just say, okay, I want to pull that into my repository. And now they're in sync again. So now this change is again in the repository. Let me see here. Yeah, here it is. Yeah. So then there is, yeah, just this is basically how you establish in a very simple way an interaction between your local machine and your Git repository. I will just show you again also another way to get files onto your in your repository. Should be another way to do this. Yeah, if you click on this plus button here, you can either create a new file or upload files. So that is another way. If you have files on your local machine, so let's say, you have a project that you have already started, now you discovered Git, now you want to use it. So you create an online repo, and then you can just add files that, you already have into your Git repository. Of course, you know, the tracking of your files starts with you uploading the files. So up to the point, you know, up to this point, even if you've made changes, they will not be tracked. So the first time you upload a file, that is basically the first commit. And then basically the first commit will just entail the entire file. And from there on, you can make like incremental commits. Cool. One final remark for this section is that, yeah, it can get quite messy. You should have realized that we have now, like, if you cloned my repository, that means you have, or if you have a fork of my repository under your account, and then you've cloned this fork onto your computer. And then you have different branches in each of these accounts, on each of these repositories. So it can get quite messy because we have now at least already 3 copies of the repository, and you know, you want to keep them all in sync. So what is a good practice is basically to make small and incremental commits and always update. So if you want to, you know, if you want to push, for example, to your Git repository and you're not sure whether someone has made changes there, like usually if it's your Git repository, then you know that nobody has made changes there. But if it's like someone else's repository, you want to first update your repository with their changes before you add changes, basically. So that otherwise it can, you know, there will be merge conflict and they might be quite nasty. Cool. Let's go one step further. Yeah, I've already showed you that. So you can also import an existing project into GitHub Online. There's this either add file or plus button. There is another way to start also with the GUI. If you have a repository that is already online that you would now like to start to track with Git, you can do that with the desktop GUI as well. So when you go to File, New Repository, then you give this repository a name. Let's say that, and then you choose a repository that you want to upload. So I'll not do that now because otherwise it'll end up in my GitHub Online repository, but you can choose any folder on your computer. You open it and then you can just, you would hit create the repository and it would be pushed to Git. I'm not doing that now. One remark here is that Git is not a storage space. So it's like, it's not for your data, it's for your files. So there will be, or there is a limit to the size of files that you can upload. I think for the repository, it's 10 gigabytes. And then there's also a total user limit. So it's not possible to, for example, to put your entire, I don't know, literature folder there or like your data set. It's really for small files, scripts, code. That is what GitHub is for. There's other tools that you can use to track and version control data sets, but that's not GitHub, Git and GitHub Online. Just that. So let's move on. Yeah. Yeah, you would then push the repository, like I said. Yeah, like I said, there's like file size limits. Yeah, so for the entire repository, the limit is 10 gigabyte, and for individual files, it's 100 megabyte. If you have a repository that contains larger files, there is a so-called .gitignore file where you can you create this file in your repository, and then you add files that should not be tracked, and they literally get ignored by Git. However, you need to the files cannot be committed yet in order to be added to the git ignore. So if they're already being tracked, the git ignore file is not a way to untrack them. So they have to be new files basically. And you would do that by literally creating this file. So you create a file.gitignore, and then you add the files that that you don't want to be tracked. So let me see, do I have a gitignore here? I think I probably do. Oh, I don't. Let us create, yeah, here it is. Let's add a file. So I've added this file test.md, and if it changes, shows me here, it should also show me here that I've made changes to the gitignore. And then if I create a file, test.md, and save that, and it doesn't check that file because I added it here to the test, to the gitignore. So it does not show up in my changes. And that's the way, for example, how you avoid tracking large files. Cool. It's also good practice to add a license file to everything you publish on GitHub online. The licensing is a whole, can of worms. I've put a link here to some guidelines. Yeah, I would recommend that if you have something that you think is like a whole project that others might look at, then you add a license that might also make you feel safe and you know what others can do with your stuff and stuff. So let's move on. So at this point you should have realized that many files can go in different directions, and we have many different versions of files. So the question is, of course, what happens if you have two versions of a file that don't match and that are, that cannot easily be merged. And this is called a merge conflict. And that's kind of illustrated here. So let's say we have a file that is called Shakespeare, whatever, .txt, so it has two lines. To be or not to be, that is the question. Then the next person uses this file and changes the second line to catnip is the question. The next person should have used this newer version of the file, but didn't, but used this one. Also changed the second line. What was the question? And now we want to merge them somehow. So we see we have two versions of this file, and this is a very simple merge conflict because the only difference between these two files is the second line. But the question is, what should be on the second line? And like I said, this is a very simple illustration of a merge conflict. It can get quite difficult and quite complex if several people make several changes to the same file. And maybe let's now just do that, like create a merge conflict, and then I'll also show you how to resolve them. And we do that on GitHub online. So let's just go to this johanna.md file. This one seems to be blank, that's okay. So let's add, let's do something else first. So let's go to the code. And let's let's create a new branch from main. So I'm going to create a branch test1 from main. Test1 isn't, because I've just created it from main, up to date with main. And let's switch back to main. But let's now edit this johanna.md file. Oh, now there's something in there for whatever reason. I think you just needed to update the view, but let's edit this file. Let's remove this statement on line 7. Or let's say, let's put dogs are here. Let's commit that. Just remembering that it was on line 7. So we commit that to main. Cool. And then we switch to dev. Now we switch to our test1 branch. Go to Johanna.md. For whatever reason, this one is empty. No, it's not. Shouldn't be empty. Oh no, it's not empty. Weird. And now edit also this file, but let's put something else here. So we've now changed the 7th line of this journal.md file, both in test1 and in main, and we've put something, you know, not matching here, something different. Let's commit that. Cool. And now we go back to main. And this is already quite a complex repo, actually. But let's now create a pull request. So let's now say we want to create a pull request from test1 into main. Git is quite smart, so it already shows you that there were recent pushes in a branch that is not main, and it prompts us to create a pull request. So let's do that. But it tells us already that it cannot automatically merge because it detects these 2 different statements on line 7 in the johanna.md file. It says you can still create the pull request. So creating the pull request is not the issue, like resolving it is the issue. So let's do that. Let's just create it. It runs some checks and it tells us that this branch has conflicts that must be resolved. You can resolve these conflicts in GitHub Online by clicking on this button here, Resolve Conflicts. And then it shows you the files where they happen. So, the way you read this is basically here, this is the divider between the 2 branches. This was what we put in test1, and this was what we put in main. It now basically asks us, what do you want to do? And like when you edit this file, the result of whatever you do here will be what is basically accepted. What is the result of the pull request. So let's say we're actually happy with these 2 lines, like we like both animals are cool. So we need to delete all this, otherwise it will remain in the file, like literally. And let's say, okay, this is what we want. And we could also say we delete one of those. That would also be fine. But say, okay, we want to keep them both. Then we click mark as resolve, commit merge. And then bam, it's done. Oh, not yeah. So now it tells us the merge conflict have been resolved, and we can now merge this pull request. Let's do it. Bam. And now we should have on main, because we merged from test1 to main, that both animals are cool. Yeah, so this is how you resolve pull requests, merge conflicts. So like I said, easy merge conflicts can be resolved in GitHub Online. For harder ones or more difficult ones, there are other actions and commands that you can do, but you need the command line for that. And yeah, I have one project where I dealt probably like 4 weeks with resolving a large merge conflict. So I would recommend the best way to deal with merge conflict is to avoid them. So yeah, that's what we've just gone through. Yeah, like I said, a good way to avoid merge conflicts is first of all, to always sync your branches before working on them and before opening a pull request. So if I make some changes before I create in my local fork or branch or whatever, I always update my branch, like, click sync fork before I create the pull request, and make small and incremental commits, so that you can, because in the end, if there's an action called cherry picking, that means that you can select small commits or like individual commits to be merged, and then you want the changes to be really small and incremental, to basically pick the ones that do not create a merge conflict, for example. Yeah, and we're almost done. These are just some bits and pieces of information that I've added here. Like I said, GitHub Online is a great resource. A lot of websites are and stuff is hosted and published on GitHub or out of GitHub, including this website. And it's also just a repository on GitHub, basically. Then contributing to open source, if you're now really inspired and if you want to work with Git, there are a couple of ways how to train your Git skills and to contribute to open source, start contributing to open source. There's a Google Summer of Code that happens every summer. I think the application deadline for participants starts in March. I'm not really sure. Maybe check that. And if you feel like you're not yet that much of a coder, there's also the Google Season of Docs, which is basically creating documentation for repositories, which is a great way of getting started with open source work. Then I've added some good Git practices here. Make small changes, commit frequently, and write good commit messages. Another good practice is that if you want to contribute to someone else's repository, you create an issue saying what you want to work on, and then you make a branch that is usually named similar to the issue, where you work on this one increment, like one individual thing. And then you make a pull request from that branch. It's called one issue, one branch, one PR, and it keeps things very modular. And it's easy for other people to review your changes, because the only difference from your new branch to the main repo is this one thing that you were working on. And if you want to work on several things, you make several branches, basically, which is why a lot of repositories that are actual libraries, they have a bazillion of branches, because people do that. They use one branch for one thing that they want to change. Be nice and polite when collaborating. Also, good practice is to avoid committing directly into the main branch. So in a library that is used by other people, the main branch is usually the kind of version of the repository that gets downloaded by people that use it. For example, sklearn or any other library that lives on GitHub, they do that. The main branch is basically their current release. And then all the changes or all the development that usually happens in a dev branch, so development branch. Only if these changes are tested thoroughly and have been approved by everyone, they get merged into the main branch, and this is then called a new release. So a major update of the main branch. There's a label called Good First Issues. If you look, we've gone through the issues and how you can look for labels in issues. There's one called Good First Issues that is usually a label for people that want to just practice their Git skills. So if you want to contribute to a repo, it's good to look for this label. Then it's also good to assign reviewers for your PRs. You know, even if you have the power to potentially merge your own pull requests, you know, it's at least it's good practice if you work with other people on this review to assign reviewers. Like if it's your own repo and nobody else ever sees what you're doing there, you know, it doesn't really matter. But as soon as there are other people working with this repo, it's good practice to have your pull requests reviewed. Yep, and there is a couple of more resources. Hacktoberfest is always in October. The idea is to contribute 4 PRs to open source libraries, and then you get, or open source repos, and then you get a badge. There's a couple of awesome lists. So that is just repositories that list a lot of resources. For example, Awesome for Beginners. The Turing Way is a nice resource for best practices around reproducible research. Yeah, and congratulations, you've mastered the course. Hope this was helpful, and yeah, see you next time.